Someone in the world develops dementia every 3 seconds. In the United States alone, an estimated 6.7 million older adults currently have Alzheimer's disease. That number is projected to double by 2060. These are not abstract statistics. They represent an accelerating public health crisis that will touch almost every family in some way. And while a lot of the conversation around dementia focuses on what supplements to take or which foods to eat, neurologists say the most impactful change most people could make has nothing to do with either of those things. It is about how much you move, or more specifically, how much you do not. The number one modifiable risk factor for dementia that neurologists consistently point to is a sedentary lifestyle, physical inactivity, sitting too much. And the data behind this is significant enough that understanding it could genuinely change how you structure your day. Nearly 1/3 of the world's adult population is physically inactive. Research puts that figure at 1.8 billion people. Most of them are not lying on couches doing nothing. They are sitting at desks for work, sitting in cars commuting, sitting during meals, and then sitting in the evening to unwind. It is the accumulated total of that sedentary time, day after day and year after year, that appears to be doing measurable damage to brain health. Let us go through exactly how this happens, because there are 4 distinct pathways through which inactivity damages the brain, and understanding all 4 makes the urgency of this much clearer. The first is reduced blood flow to the brain. Your brain is an extraordinarily energy-intensive organ. It represents about 2% of your body weight, but consumes approximately 20% of your body's total energy. It needs a constant, steady supply of oxygen and nutrients delivered through blood flow to function properly and to maintain the cellular processes that protect against neurodegeneration. Physical activity is one of the most powerful drivers of cerebral blood flow. When you move, your heart works harder, blood circulates more actively throughout the body, including to the brain, and the delivery of oxygen and nutrients increases. When you sit for prolonged periods with minimal movement, blood flow to the brain slows. This reduced circulation impairs the brain's ability to clear waste products, deliver nutrients efficiently, and maintain the cellular repair processes that protect against long-term damage. Vascular dementia, one of the most common forms of dementia, is directly caused by conditions that interrupt blood and oxygen supply to the brain. The connection between impaired cerebrovascular circulation and dementia is one of the most well-established in the research. The second pathway is increased cardiovascular and metabolic risk. Most people understand that heart disease and diabetes are bad for the heart. What is less well understood is how directly those conditions damage the brain. Hypertension damages blood vessel walls throughout the body, including the small vessels in the brain. High blood sugar drives inflammation and causes damage to neurons and blood vessels. Obesity increases systemic inflammation, disrupts metabolic signaling, and places additional strain on the cardiovascular system. All of these conditions are significantly more likely in people who live sedentary lives, and all of them are significant independent risk factors for dementia. Physical inactivity does not just raise dementia risk directly, it raises it indirectly through a cascade of metabolic and cardiovascular changes that each contribute their own damage to brain health over time. The third pathway is structural changes in the brain itself. Physical activity does not just improve blood flow and reduce metabolic risk. It actually changes the physical structure of the brain in measurable ways. Research has found that physical inactivity is associated with hippocampal atrophy, meaning the shrinking of the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for memory formation and retrieval. Studies examining brain volume in active versus inactive individuals found that maintaining the recommended 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity was associated with greater brain volume and reduced atrophy over time. The hippocampus is also the region most severely affected in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, which makes its preservation a direct priority in any dementia prevention strategy. The fourth pathway is chronic inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation is increasingly understood as a central driver of neurodegeneration. A sedentary lifestyle promotes this type of inflammation systemically, And in the brain specifically, it contributes to the buildup of beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the two most well-studied biological markers of Alzheimer's disease. Regular physical activity reduces systemic inflammation markers and appears to slow or reduce this pathological buildup. So the four mechanisms are clear. Less movement means less blood flow to the brain, worse cardiovascular and metabolic health, brain shrinkage in memory-critical regions, and higher chronic inflammation. All four of those pathways point in the same direction, and all four of them are modifiable through increased physical activity. The practical question is how much movement is actually needed to meaningfully reduce risk. The good news here is that the threshold is lower than most people assume. Studies have found that even 15 to 30 minutes of walking 1 or 2 times per week is associated with a meaningfully reduced dementia risk compared to being completely inactive. You do not need to be running marathons or spending hours in the gym. You need to be moving more than you currently are, particularly if your baseline is sitting for most of the day. The recommended target is 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week. That is 30 minutes 5 days a week or 25 minutes 6 days a week. Moderate intensity means walking at a pace where you can still hold a conversation but are breathing more noticeably than at rest. Activities like brisk walking, cycling, swimming, dancing, and even active household chores all count. Breaking up prolonged sitting is also independently valuable, separate from structured exercise. Getting up and moving for a few minutes every hour, taking the stairs, walking to speak with someone rather than sending a message, parking further away. These small interruptions to sitting have measurable cardiovascular and metabolic benefits that accumulate across a day. Beyond movement, neurologists point to a few other habits that contribute meaningfully to dementia risk reduction. Social engagement and cognitive stimulation are both strongly associated with brain health. Activities that involve both at once, like board games, group classes, or social sports, appear to be especially beneficial. Social isolation is itself a significant dementia risk factor that gets less attention than it deserves. Diet patterns like the MIND diet, which combines elements of the Mediterranean and DASH diets with specific emphasis on brain-protective foods, including leafy greens, berries, fish, nuts, and olive oil, are associated with lower dementia risk in research. Avoiding smoking and limiting alcohol both reduce vascular damage that contributes to cognitive decline. But all of those factors sit downstream of the most fundamental one. A body that moves regularly has better circulation, better metabolic health, less inflammation, and more structural brain volume than a body that does not. Everything else builds on that foundation. The dementia trajectory is not fixed. The decisions you make today about how much you move are writing the biological story of your brain health years from now. That is not a reason for panic. It is a reason to stand up. One more thing worth underlining. The research on dementia prevention consistently shows that the earlier you start building protective habits, the greater the impact. The damage from inactivity and chronic inflammation accumulates slowly and silently long before any symptoms appear. It is never too late to benefit from becoming more active, but starting now is meaningfully better than starting later. The brain you have in your 70s and 80s is being shaped right now by the daily habits you are building today. Movement is one of the most powerful inputs you have control over. Use it. New content on brain health, nutrition, and how your body works drops every single day. Subscribe and stay ahead